All right, everyone, we've hit 1 o'clock. As you've probably seen on your screen, the meeting is being recorded and will be posted up on the Community Connections website after the conclusion of all the meetings. This is the third of 3 question and answer sessions being hosted by the review team and the Heightened Scrutiny team of Community Connections. My name is Percy Turner. I'm working with Wichita State University in conjunction with KDADS to form the Community Connections team. We have multiple representatives here today of both teams. Zane May and Sarah Sammer are my compatriots at WSU. We also have from KDADS Russell Bowles, Ian, let's say Kenzie, I'm not sure, Colin Rourke, and I'm looking for LaTanya Wright. I do not see her quite yet. And oh, there she is. LaTanya Wright is here. And then Russell Bowles. We are all here today to help folks, providers, get a better understanding of the remediation process and the heightened scrutiny process via a question and answer period. We are going to first have some brief updates from Russell and Colin. And then afterwards, we will go into our question and answer period. Because we have somewhere around 30 people here today, we ask that you ask your questions in an orderly fashion, and we'll explain how that will work after the updates. So let's go ahead and pass it over to Russell for our first set of updates, and then we'll talk more specifically about how the question and answer sessions will work. Russ?
Thank you, Percy. And I want to welcome and appreciate everybody joining us today for this question and answer session. Would like to get started with a little bit of data so everybody kind of knows where we're at. We have a total of 63 providers that have some level of compliance. Out of that 63, 45 providers have been determined compliant with all the settings they submitted. So moving right along with that, there are 638 settings that have been determined as being compliant. And we're currently working about between 84 and 85% of the evidence submitted that we have reviewed and responded to. So with that, I do want to talk about the remediation, where to go to find assistance with remediation, where out of those which will you should go to initially get what you're hopefully looking for. So I will start with that. On the Community Connections ks.org website, you can go, and before you even log into that, you would go to Remediation Resources. That's a tab that's across the top. You click on it and it'll provide a drop-down menu. If you are looking for a reminder or questions on how to work through the remediation tab and what to do in there, you would go to what's called the Provider Remediation Handbook. That will pretty much walk you through getting into the remediation tab and working your way through that. Once you get to that point, then also under Remediation Resources tab, there'll be a drop down that says Evidence Guidance. That will give you guidance by question of what we are looking for as far as evidence. What would make the best evidence? What does CMS expect from the state of Kansas? And how best can we show CMS that we are becoming compliant? All right, so I guess the next thing is, well, what is remediation? So remediation is a process for assessing settings to submit evidence to come into compliance with the final settings rule. That is the remediation process. We're here to work with you throughout that process. I know at some points it can feel a little cumbersome. We will help you through that. The process to meet final rule was initially you submitted the assessment back in September of 2019 through February of 2020. Those assessments were reviewed and the settings were notified of what questions need to be remediated. Each notified setting would need to complete a strategy for each question. Each setting uploads new evidence for each question in the remediation. So once you select a strategy, it will open up the opportunity for you to submit evidence. With that being said, that process is, there are a couple pre-identified strategies that you can choose, and then there is the other strategy. Keep in mind that the other strategy is just to let us know if the strategy that you want to choose is different from those pre-selected strategies for that question, and that other strategy would need to go through a review and process before it would be open to submit evidence. For every strategy that you submit for a question, you would need to also submit a date that you intend to complete that strategy. Currently, our date caps out at, I believe it's July 1st on that. So don't worry about that. Put that date in just so that you can get past that part. That just gives us an idea for when you would want to meet that goal. All right, so you're uploading evidence into the remediation tab. Each question would be reviewed for compliance, and then each question not compliant would be sent an email describing what is good and what needs work. This will also show up in your remediation tab. For each question that was determined compliant, you would receive an email that states compliant, and that would also show up for that setting on the remediation tab. Settings questions continue this process until all questions are compliant. So you would continue to submit new evidence until that question has been deemed compliant. And then once all of your questions for that setting have been deemed compliant, that setting would then be deemed to be compliant. And to talk through a little bit more about that, there is a remediation and a heightened scrutiny process that happens. So if you have been deemed to fall into the heightened scrutiny category 1 or category 2 process, which Colin will go into more detail about, please go ahead. Remediation and heightened scrutiny can be and should be done concurrently if you need to do those. So please continue with those. There are a few heightened scrutiny category 3 questions, which are based on the possibility of isolation. Those can be remediated through the remediation tab. All right, so with that, I will be available for questions, and I'd like to turn it back over to Percy or Colin.
Thanks, Rusty. What I'm going to do is I'm going to end up giving this over to Colin. Colin, if you have any updates, let's go ahead and do that. And then I will explain how question and answer works, and we'll move on from there.
All right. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. The first date that's coming up, that's a hard CMS deadline, and it's specific for those that are category 3 heightened scrutiny only, is for July 1st of 2021. So all those settings who are category 3 only can remediate the questions that flagged you for heightened scrutiny and have that designation removed if remediation strategies are implemented by or before July 1st of 2021. And just as a reminder, Category 3 settings are any other settings that have the effect of isolating individuals receiving Medicaid home and community-based services from the broader community of individuals not receiving Medicaid HCBS. You will find questions that require remediation for Category 3 questions in the remediation tab on your provider portal. If you have not started already, this is where you submit remediation strategies, and when approved and implemented, can have your heightened scrutiny designation removed and work towards full final rule compliance. For those settings that do not meet the date of July 1st of 2021, that will then place you as solidified as a Category 3 heightened scrutiny setting, and we will have to submit a list of all settings that have been willing and able to comply. So those who have been working on the heightened scrutiny process and or remediation will supply a list to CMS stating that we believe that these settings can come into compliance by 2023. So it's not completely done. It just means that you will then be placed in the heightened scrutiny category for good and require additional review from KDADS and CMS as well. So we definitely are confident that settings who have been working with the remediation tab and otherwise can get that completed and put in there for the July 1st deadline. But just as an assurance, if settings do not meet that deadline, it just means that you will continue to have to remediate like everyone else, same with those who do pass it, but you will be placed as heightened scrutiny Category 3 and have to have further review. With that being said, we have a lot of settings who were miscategorized due to the submission of evidence. A lot of times it was not enough to verify whether or not the setting was connected to or adjacent on the grounds of an institution. So for any setting that has been flagged for heightened scrutiny Category 1 and or 2, the two-way communication feature has been enabled for you to communicate with the heightened scrutiny team directly. So we're utilizing that specifically for scheduling assessments for Category 1 and or 2 settings. And then for those who are miscategorized, we're utilizing it to verify information and get supporting evidence that shows that the setting is not in fact next to, connected to, or adjacent to an institution. So we really want to get those settings verified, not only so they can continue on their path to overall compliance, but can likely be removed from even a Category 3 designation as well, because the setting has remediated. So I'd be glad to answer any questions on that after this, but I also wanted to touch base on those who fall into Category 1 and or 2 that are verified to be connected to, on the grounds of, or adjacent to an institutional-like setting. The heightened scrutiny team continues conducting and scheduling heightened scrutiny virtual assessments, and overall things have been going really well. Updates that have been required of settings have been relatively minor. As a reminder, if a setting is out of compliance following the virtual on-site assessment, the setting will be required to submit a plan with timelines to show how you will come into, or how the setting will come into compliance by the March 17th, 2023 deadline. This information will be included in the heightened scrutiny summary that's submitted to CMS and utilized for ongoing monitoring that will occur to ensure the setting maintains final settings rule requirements. Remediation of all non-compliant questions should continue. The setting must be in full compliance of the final settings rule to continue providing HCBS services after March 17th of 2023. The ongoing monitoring process will be utilized to ensure policies and procedures are implemented as written and follow up on any plans from heightened scrutiny summaries to ensure full compliance. So when you're working with the heightened scrutiny team and updating plans to come into final settings rule compliance, those are areas that'll be highlighted for future review, and the ongoing monitoring team will want to ensure that those are implemented as written come time to determine whether transition or the continuation of HCBS services occurs. The Heightened Scrutiny team's dedicated to working with all willing and able settings to come into compliance. So once the assessment is complete, if updates are necessary and there's any confusion, we'll work with the settings to provide promising practices and other suggestions for compliance that we have received from CMS and through conducting assessments. As a reminder, again, Heightened Scrutiny settings can communicate with the Heightened Scrutiny team via the two-way communication feature found on the Heightened Scrutiny tab for those who have been marked as category 1 and or 2. The Heightened Scrutiny team, once the on-site assessment is complete, that's where any communication will occur, and we'll make sure that you're in the understanding that the summaries are complete. So once the summaries are complete, we need to place them for public comment at a later date and then submit them to CMS as those packets of us saying we believe the setting can and will overcome any presumptions or anything that led to a heightened scrutiny designation. Regardless, it's important that any myths and misconceptions are addressed to ease concerns. We don't want settings to worry about the actual assessment process that we're going through right now and or closure due to non-compliance at this time. As we've discovered through review, many of you already comply or have very little to implement in order to come into compliance. Regardless, the purpose of the assessment, the heightened scrutiny assessment, is to determine the setting's level of compliance, and then the heightened scrutiny team will work with all willing and able settings to complete a summary with plans and timelines as necessary to show how the setting will comply prior to the March 17th, 2023 deadline. So with that being said, that was a lot of information, and I'd be glad to touch base on any questions or concerns that anyone has with the heightened scrutiny process. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. Okay, so before we get into our question and answer session, I'm just going to give a little explanation as to how we're going to be running things. So as you see from Matlow, we're going to be asking folks to use the raise hand feature to be addressed if you have the most recent version of Zoom. That can be found under reactions. It's a little smiley face with a plus near the right top of its head. If you click that, then on the bottom of it, it says raise hand, and you can do that, and I will address you and then lower your hand for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And we will get to your question. If you cannot find the raise hand function, feel free to utilize our chat function. The chat function is will allow for folks to type in their questions, and I will read those for you. That way, those of you who are connecting via phone can hear the questions as well. If you are on the phone, we would ask that you use *6 to unmute yourself, say your name, and then use your phone's function to mute yourself again. I will acknowledge you, and then we will go ahead from there and answer your question. So we have almost 40 people in the room now, so we're going to do the best that we can to be transparent about who's coming up next question-wise and how we're going to do that. We just want to make sure that we're getting as many things answered from you as possible. So the first is coming from Matt Lowe, who has their hand up. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute them, and we will get started.
Can I go, Percy?
Yes, please.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, guys. I want to ask this question because our site flagged for, we have 2 sites, flagged for heightened scrutiny 2 and 3, and I'm trying to work hard to get I think it's the 3. First of all, I want to clarify, is the category 3 that has to be corrected before July 1st or is it the 2 and 3? What category has to be corrected before July 1st?
Thank you. So specifically, category 3 only settings have the option to have their designation as a heightened scrutiny setting removed if it's remediated prior to the July 1st, 2021 deadline. So that CMS is allowing any settings that have been flagged for heightened scrutiny 3 the chance to remediate out of that designation. So if the setting does not remediate by July 1st of 2021, you will then be flagged for good as heightened scrutiny category 3 and just still be required to complete all necessary remediation to come into compliance. So more or less, it's for the 7/1 deadline is an option for category 3 only settings to have that designation removed.
Okay, so I am working hard. I know the red is the category 3, and oh boy, well, probably not. I think maybe the red and the orange are the category 3. One of my questions on C2 was saying that requires an on-site visit. I did correct it 2 days ago. It marked it's, I got a 2-way communication that said it's been marked as compliant in one of the settings, but the red is still showing. It's still showing as on-site visit required when I go to the remediation tab.
Okay, thank you. So for the first part, that sounds like you had your setting, it was incorrectly designated as connected to or on the grounds of an institution, and you must have supplied pictures to verify that it was not. And so from what I've gathered, the heightened scrutiny team has let you know that you will be marked as compliant for category 1 and or 2. So that wouldn't require an on-site. And Russell, help me if there might be more, but it sounds like the process hasn't gone all the way through to have that designation removed after your submission of evidence. So that might need to occur. And that's on our side, I believe.
Okay, because I was just wondering that if there's going to be an on-site visit, because honestly, I'm sure like a lot of people, I don't want it. I want my heightened scrutiny category 3 removed instead of being put permanently on that, and then having further documentation or proof to the CMS. So I'm working really hard to remediate those. My other question is, on the gated that is wanting I think that's like C3, wanting a policy that shows that I read the evidence and the preferred evidence they would like on change of policy, showing that these residents are isolated. I had submitted some evidences back in April, and I wrote a whole new policy. Part of it was residents' rights, and I had included the right to choose your physician, included rights to participate in activities within and outside the facilities. I'd included all these rights that the evidence is suggesting, but it still rejected those evidence. And so I would just like a clarification or an explanation on exactly what is needed.
Okay, yeah, this is Russell. You should have, and so if this didn't occur, please let me know. But what should have come back is not just rejected, but if you click on that question, you should be able to read why the evidence was rejected. It should tell you what was good about your evidence and what still needed to be work. Most of what we're finding with a lot of policies and procedures that have been submitted is they're missing some key indicators to identify them as a policy or procedure, which would be name of the facility or provider, what the policy is about. So in other words, a name of the policy, and then an effective date of when this policy becomes effective. We are accepting, if you do have a lengthy policy approval process for your organization, if you put draft in there where there is a, instead of an effective date, we'll still look at that. We do expect that to continue through the policy approval process for your facility once we have looked at it and deemed it to meet compliance with the final rule.
Okay, that sounds helpful. When you said label what kind of policy, I mean, let me just ask this. Are you wanting maybe those specific ones to be highlighted? Because I'm thinking that each of it has maybe like, there's a, first of all, it has our logo and the name of our facility on the policy page. And I think I submitted 2 pages because I saw that policy answered like 2 or 3 questions. And so I don't know, maybe you, and I'll be one of, you know, each of it had a title, residents' rights to this, and then it would have like 4 bullet points at the bottom. But when I read why it was rejected, it's as if they want you to state how this would happen. Like if you say your resident has a right to have, you know, to participate in communities, in activities outside, you know, in the community, things like that. They have a right to choose their own provider. It's as if the 2-way back communication I got was how. And that's what's really confusing to me.
Okay, so that would be the procedure part, kind of explaining that, yep, they do have the right to do that. How does your agency ensure that they're doing that? Do you notify them by bulletin board or by weekly meeting, by, I mean, methods upon that way? So that might help with that as well, depending on the question that it's being utilized for.
Okay, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Okay, so it looks like we have Becky next, and then Shannon, and then Lori, and we also have a chat question as well. So we'll go with Becky first. Good morning, Becky.
Becky's computer at all about you, and I had just visited with one of you shortly, just a little while ago, and I had a couple of questions about on C6, where it asks if persons on this site are required to receive medical behavior therapy services on site. All of my clients are their own guardians. We cannot require them to take medicine, do any of those things. What, other than their rights, do I need to prove that is, I mean, that is obviously not even a debatable issue, that it is totally their right to cite, but we do not require any.
So with that, a policy would need to be placed that says that individuals have the right to choose their medical behavioral therapy services wherever they choose them from. So part of the thing with the final rule is, you're absolutely correct. A lot of these are rights, and guardians and individuals can make their own choices, but the final rule has been put in place because there have been nationwide providers who still require them, if they're going to reside in their services, they're going to require them to have everything from them, which is an institutional model. So therefore, They want to see some policies and procedures that show individuals have the choices to select their own providers, to go out in the community, you know, and have services delivered the way they want them delivered. So policies should be set up along that lines.
Okay. But that isn't really what the question asked. That's where I'm having trouble with getting through the compliance part. I'm answering the question that's asked. Are they required? No.
Right, and then you have to
Yes or
prove
no
that they're not required.
question. And so I'm a little confused with that. And then I also wanted to ask, when we were talking about residential, or you were speaking about settings not close next to other mental health sites or in their institutions. Because all of my clients are their own guardians, where they choose to live is where they choose to live. If it happens to be next door to a mental institution, that is their choice. Would it not be?
It would be, but because CMS has determined that the proximity to them, it is on the state of Kansas to show CMS that it is not associated with that institution.
Okay,
So
so
the other thing is to keep in mind, this is not about the individual specifically. This is about the provider providing services.
right, and I understand that. But the question asked is, where is it? I don't have the question exactly in front of me right now. That they can't be living near indicates that they can't. And I'm saying as a provider, I can't tell them where they can or cannot live. I could say, my suggestion is, or try to guide them in a way away from that. But as a provider, I don't have that power to say, you can't do anything, nor do I want it. So when I write the policy, I understand it if it was a group living facility or that sort of thing, but where all of my people are independent, I have just, I would like to know exactly how I state that so that we, you know, no, I can't require that.
So first, let me ask, are you serving individuals that are IDD?
Yes,
Okay. Are you billing the billing code of residential?
yes,
Okay, CMS, regardless of whether they're living in their own home, their own apartment, if you are billing for residential, CMS has made it very clear to us that that is considered a provider operated location. So with that, I mean, if they are living next to an institution, then adjacent to or on the grounds of, then they would require, that particular setting would require an on-site visit from the Heightened Scrutiny team. So no, you can't tell them where to live, but it will require an on-site.
I don't have anybody. It was just the way the word is, the way the question is worded, that concerned me. Because I feel like it's like a violation of me saying so. And I understand you're talking about that they consider their residential sites as part, or I say part of our, however, we do not have control over whether they put a lock on their door into the bathroom, or if they, you know, those are their choices. And where we draw that line. And so the line is drawn at them living next door to a mental institution or another sort of provider of that sort.
Okay. I guess I may not fully be understanding your question, because I'm reading the assessment right now, and it says for question C1, is this site located in or attached to a building that is also provides inpatient institutional treatment? C2, is this site located in a building on the grounds of or immediately adjacent to a public institution? So it's just asking, and yes, it's a yes or no question. If you're saying no, then showing us a map type of process would help eliminate that or prove that.
Okay, so just a Google map of that is enough to prove that.
Google map, but you'd want to make sure that you identify as many surrounding structures as possible
Okay,
with that. And then that would go through, if it is a question C1 or C2, that would go through the heightened scrutiny process.
okay,
So you'd need to go to the heightened scrutiny tab and work that through the two-way communication with them and Colin's team.
okay.
And
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
thank you. And I just placed a link in the chat for the photo guidance for category 1 and or 2 to help you with what we were looking for and how to, you know, screenshot or do things like that to provide the evidence.
Okay. I appreciate that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Becky. We're going to move to our next question from Shannon.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. Hopefully can be answered relatively quickly. For my, so we operate, and these questions are related to assisted livings. So they are attached to a skilled nursing facility, or they are on a property adjacent to a skilled nursing facility. We do have our site visits scheduled, but how does that heightened scrutiny get remediated? We can't unattach them or move them.
Thank you. And that's a good question. So for heightened scrutiny category 1 and or 2, that will always remain. So the categorization is due to the location. So the way we're to resolve that at this time is the on-site or virtual assessment process. So in combined with the remediation efforts outside of that, the heightened scrutiny assessment process is designed to collect the information from executive director, staff at the setting, and individuals served to determine the level of compliance. So let's say, like a gold star example, that the setting has everything already in place. They are final rule compliance. The only reason they are flagged is due to that location. That is compliant.
Okay.
So it's not so much of remediating out of C1 or C2, because like you said, yeah, that would be completely moving the location, and that totally is not required. It is just required that there is sufficient evidence in place and policies and procedures implemented as written to show that with all this in place, you overcome that presumption that CMS has labeled as a category 1 or 2 setting.
Okay, all right. And then another question. So some of our locations, we have received, let me get to my list here. Does the site also offer on-site day services? And so I asked a question about adult daycare in our assisted livings, which we do. My question is where do we remediate that? Do we submit that information on the heightened scrutiny tab because we can, or should we do that on the remediation tab?
Shannon, this is Russell. You should do that on the remediation tab. And what would a good way to remediate that would be to basically say it would be a policy or procedure indicating persons served have autonomy, integration, and choice, even if both residential and day services are offered the same location. And day services would refer to exactly what you're talking about, whether it's IDD, assisted living. You know, if you're providing 24-hour care, then they're doing something during the day, activities and stuff. So yeah, and saying they have the ability to be part of the community just like anybody without disabilities.
All right, so that's what we did. I put it on the remediation tab. It's showing right now that it's under review. What can we expect from a timeline on that, or is it because those locations might be in a category 1 or 2 that we haven't gotten any feedback yet?
Timeline's hard to say, and I'm going to say that because kind of give you an idea where we just since we've started this process. We have received over 51,000 pieces of evidence, and we have reviewed at least 84 to 85% of those. So we're working through those as quickly as possible. Be assured we are going to respond back to those as quickly as we can get to them. I do know coming up here very shortly, one of the things we are going to do is start focusing our efforts to make sure that heightened scrutiny category 3 only settings that have submitted evidence, we're going to try to get that evidence reviewed to make sure that there's no additional review or tasks for those. And just so I'm clear, because I did see in the chat, so I'll kind of answer this in line with your questions too. Heightened scrutiny category 3 questions are questions C3, C6, and C7A or C7B. So as you were talking about C7.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yes, that question we do plan on prioritizing to get to.
Okay. All right. Another quick question. So again, on the assisted livings, we have an admission agreement, a financial agreement, and we have multiple locations. So that was submitted as evidence on the original self-assessment, the same evidence for all locations. And in some locations, there's some issue with that we require remediation. And then in some locations, it's not. And those are the 2 questions at E. And so we're not really sure how to remediate that because it was accepted in some places and not accepted in others.
Okay. I'm going to put my email out here. Percy, would you mind also typing that for me in the chat? But here is my email. It's Russell with 2 S's, 2 L's, .Bowles, and that's B as in boy, OWLES, @ks.gov. And if you wouldn't mind, just send me that question in an email. Let me know what your the name of your provider or your provider name, and then the name of the settings so that we can go look specifically at that evidence.
Okay. And then one last question. If we, on the original site assessment or the self-assessment, if we believe now that the question was not answered correctly, and now it requires remediation, how do we fix that?
Just go ahead and submit remediation evidence.
So the same thing that we submitted on the original self-assessment?
Quite possibly.
Okay, all right, because this one has to do with H3 and access, and again, in the assisted livings, is access limited, and we have keypadded doors, locked doors, so some folks can't get out, but some people can. So I think we might have not answered that question correctly for some of our locations. So, okay.
Sure, and I will say Once you submit evidence in the remediation tab, so once you get past strategy and all that and submit evidence in remediation tab, we were able to make some upgrades to the website. So at that point, then we can be very specific back to you with what is good and what needs work on each piece.
Okay. All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Russell. Appreciate it. Before we go to, we're going to go to Lori's question, and then we have some things in the chat. As we're moving over, I really want to highlight something that has been kind of brought up around questions and compliance, meaning the opposite of the question. And this is not always the case. So Latanya put in here, it is okay to be located on the grounds attached to or adjacent to an institutional facility. You do not have to move anyone. Individuals can live where they so choose or what is best for them. It is up to the provider to show through policy and practices that they are not being ran like an institution, but a home and community-based service or setting. So a lot of people are believing that if you get a non-compliant result on a question, that the opposite, you must do the opposite in order to gain compliance. So that's where the C1 and C2 confusion comes in. Do we have to move people? Because you basically said that we're not allowed to have people living there. So if you look at what Lasagna is saying, it is more about demonstrating and getting around the presumption of isolation that may come with answers to questions. So if there are multiple homes in a close proximity, there can be a presumption of isolation. How do we overcome that? Doesn't mean that you need to move your homes. It means you need to overcome the presumption of isolation that may come with having things in close proximity. So having that said, we're going to get to Lori's question. Lori, I'm asking you to unmute. And whenever you're ready, you can unmute and I will lower your hand.
Since Lori's on the phone, she might need to press *6 to unmute.
Lori, try *6 to unmute yourself for the first time. Ah.
Okay, I was pressing #6. That does not work. Okay, I have two questions. The first one is we had our virtual assessment on May 3rd for our last location that is in heightened scrutiny. And I was just wondering when we might hear back the results of the virtual assessment.
Thank you. And this is Colin. The heightened scrutiny team. So we have now that the assessment is complete, the process is to begin working on the summary. So the heightened scrutiny team completes the on-site virtual assessment, puts together the summary, determines whether or not there is a need for plans. So at that time, that's when additional communication would occur via the two-way communication if needed. A lot of times providers, because they have the ability to do this as well, is to determine and come up with a plan during the interviews, regardless, and apologies for the dog in the background. So regardless, the team will follow up. So we're working on that process now and following up with settings and verifying when it is complete. So when we've determined and reviewed the summary, and if there's no plans necessary, we'll follow up on the two-way and let you know that now your setting will be, sorry about that, placed in, yeah, he wants to be big, he's a little guy, but you'll then be waiting for public comment. So once the summary part is complete, there will be notification via the heightened scrutiny team on the two-way, and then it'll be waiting for public comment, and then finally submission to CMS. So we'll definitely follow up and let you know that you've done all you can do in regards to the heightened scrutiny summary. As a reminder though, just for all settings, even though you've completed the assessment, you're still required to address any non-compliant questions via remediation. So always remember to continue that part. But yeah, once we are done with the assessment and any plans, we will let you know when that is done. So be waiting for that, and the team will be following up. We've just completed a lot of assessments, and are working on the summaries and any follow-up. So we appreciate your patience on that.
Okay, so it could take a while.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too long as far as determining whether or not. So if no plans are necessary, you should be receiving information back from the team, letting you know, as far as the heightened scrutiny summary goes, you're good to go, and it'll be waiting for submission, and please to continue any other remediation.
Okay, thank you. Then my second question is, we have several people that own their own homes, and I have been looking for some guidance as to how I document that without providing any PHI. So if I could get some guidance on that, it would be great.
Definitely. And Russell, I didn't know if you had follow up on that portion for remediation, or if that was something else.
Sorry, I was reading some chat. So could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I have all of our residential locations in full compliance, except for a few where the client or their family owns the home. And I'm struggling with, how do I provide documentation of home ownership without providing any PHI?
So you're basically referencing question E1? Is that what I understand?
Yes.
Okay. You could, if you're providing residential services at that location, instead of trying to provide home ownership, you could use your provider policy that talks about advocating for individuals for protection against evictions. So you could basically use that same type of a policy, showing that you would advocate, on their behalf for eviction.
I think this is the question where we provided leases. I'm not sure now if that's E1 or not, but for most of our other places, we're able to provide a copy of the lease and, block out PHI.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do that for somebody that owns their own home.
Okay, so yeah, I would say a policy would work really well for that instead of a lease. With a policy basically describing how you would advocate for individuals to ensure landlord-tenant laws or protections from evictions. Because it's really hard to, even if you did provide a mortgage, I know mine, they have to wheel it in a wheelbarrow. So yeah, so I think a policy would probably be more advantageous for you at that point.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. We are going to go into the chat before we get to Lisa and then Sarah. So it looks like there is one thing that we haven't really addressed through the chat. So let's make sure that we get to it. It is questions from Karen. Karen asks, how often are the two-way communications or two-way messages checked on the website? I submitted a question last week and still have not heard back. So we'll start with that one, and she has a follow-up.
Yes, this is Colin, and the review team, it's typically, daily, definitely, we're checking and following up on those. We have, in combination with those that we're working to schedule assessments with, we're working with hundreds of settings that, did not submit sufficient evidence for that incorrect categorization of 1 and 2. So we appreciate it, all your patience, but we are following up these as quickly as possible to ensure not only that we follow up on those correct designations, but with all those that have heightened scrutiny related questions for our team. So I've also direct messages to Karen, and we're going to have the heightened scrutiny team following up with you as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, and then Karen's follow-up, are all the reviewers provided the same training with regards to components of compliance? I feel like I am chasing a moving target when I submit documentation and it is rejected. She is now working on her third submission.
Yes. All validators and reviewers receive the training, the same training. And they have access to all the same guidance materials.
Fantastic, thank you, Russ. And it looks like the other things here have been addressed. I appreciate folks for kind of hopping into the chat and helping. Destiny Supports has a chat, but we're gonna go ahead and get to Lisa and Sarah, and then we'll go down to talk with Destiny Supports in the chat. Lisa, you're up. I am asking you to unmute now.
Hi, thank you. So I am a child placing agency and trying to remediate a few that I'm really struggling with. And so wanted to see if you have any recommendations. So in particular, G1, G2, and H2 are the things that I am struggling with. So I feel like a lot of the language around the assessment is related more to adults than children. And so I'm struggling with this a little bit. So foster homes, if they are not physically accessible, depending on what the need is, then we typically wouldn't be able to place that child there because the home is not physically accessible. So if the child is in a wheelchair and the home is not wheelchair accessible, then the child in that home would not match for a placement. So does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes.
Okay.
It does make sense. And yeah, your assessment does look a little different from majority of everybody else. So pretty much with that, I would say a policy or procedure for your child placing agency that says that, you know, foster care homes are selected to be able to meet needs and include those items as needed before placement. Something along that lines. And sorry, I don't have a preset, you know, because your guys' stuff is always so unique.
Right.
So if there are quite a few questions that you have in reference to that, and I mean, I'm be glad to answer that for as many people, so as many people can hear as possible. But to help you work through yours, if you would like, you can contact myself and LaTanya, and we can absolutely do a one-on-one.
Okay. But I know I've been in communication with at least one other child placing agency, and Amy's on the meeting too. I know we had some of the same struggles, and I imagine some of the other child placing agencies do as well, but it seems like so far on this call, it's not been very many child placing agencies. So whatever you prefer, if you want to talk through this now, or if setting up a different time to talk is better, I'm fine with that as well.
Well, let's look first. Let me look at what's the name of your agency, so I can at least pull that assessment up.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm with DECA, DCCCA.
And you were in specific reference to question G?
Yeah, looking at G1 and G2, and then we also had some questions with H2.
Okay. Yeah. So pretty much along that lines would be a policy or procedure that says you wouldn't, you know, that you place individuals based on physical accessibility, and if that changes, then individuals are afforded either a change in location, and I'm not sure exactly how you would word that, but a change in location, or those components would be added to the home.
Okay. And so that would somewhat cover G1 and G2.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I feel pretty comfortable with that. So my question on H2 is that we often struggle to receive the person-centered service plans. And so feeling like that's a little out of our control, having a policy or procedure saying that will ensure that we have that, and that it's and that the family has it, and then it reflects the rights being equal to the rights of other children not receiving HCBS services. It just seems, since we don't create that document, and we often sometimes can even have trouble getting our hands on it. Do you have any recommendations for what would cover us with that?
That is a little more complex question. I'm going to have to take that question up and get back to you and the child placing agency community as a whole. Because that if that's an issue for you, I'm guessing that is probably going to be an issue across the board.
Right. And I don't even know that we always know for sure if children are on the waiver. Like, there's just a lot of disconnect, I think, between systems. And so I just, yeah, that would be great if you could do some checking and following up on that, because I feel like that one is really kind of out of our hands. And so for us to ensure some of that just seems challenging.
Absolutely. That I will do.
Okay. Do you want me to put, I wrote your email down so I can email you, or I can put my email in the chat. What would you prefer?
Won't you go ahead and email me, because I will better remember.
Okay.
I mean, even write it down on my paper. I mean, if I get reminders, it helps.
Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you so much. Sarah, you are next, and it looks like you've unmuted. Please go ahead.
I just have a question about, I had a client move, well, a couple of them during all this. And when I don't remember how I did it on the website, but I clicked that the address changed. Well, it just deleted the whole assessment. How do I complete new assessments for those two locations?
Thank you, Sarah. With that, those new assessments will come in under the new assessment and ongoing monitoring process. So currently our process for those are up at CMS for their input and approval. So when those come back to us, then we will reach out to everyone who has notified us through the Community Connections website that these settings have either moved or there's a new setting. And then,
okay, I was just making sure I wasn't not doing what I needed to do.
Anything yet? No.
Okay. That's all.
Also, if I will say for people, if this is like you want to close down or move and it's your only setting, or if these will be in that lines, we will probably be reaching out to you to talk to you about that, just to make sure, because we don't want anybody to have to start from scratch So if they at least have one setting in there that they can continue working on, that is really what we like to see, is to help someone get to that point, and that will make the ongoing monitoring and new setting process a little easier for everyone.
Right. I already almost have 65 sites done. So I was hoping I could just be done, do those 2 and be done. That's why I asked.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. We do have some more things in chat here. Destiny Supports says, I completed the HCBS setting notification form for 3 sites. 1 was missed in the first place. 1 was where the consumer moved after the initial survey, and 1 was a new consumer. Will these be able to remediate? When will these settings be added so that we can submit required evidence? And Russ, I think that you've talked about this a little bit, but just to reiterate so that you don't necessarily have to, we are in development. These processes have been developed. They are currently at CMS, who is kind of reviewing and giving feedback. And so once those come out of that, we will be communicating with everybody who has filled out these particular forms, so that we can get things taken care of in terms of assessing sites that need to be assessed, either that slips through the cracks the first attempt, or that are new, or that clients have moved into recently. So I believe, unless you wanted to say anything else, Russ, I know that you had just said that. Is there any other additional pieces that you want to go into?
I think that pretty well covers it.
So let's give a little more time and energy for folks who have any questions. Feel free to raise your hand again. If you are calling via phone, unmute and state your name, and I'll acknowledge you, and we'll go that way.
Or let me call you when I'm done.
I'll give some space and energy for that. Go ahead.
Okay, hi. Hey, one more question. And thanks for the answers from the chat. So the other questions that don't fall under the heightened scrutiny, and you probably answered it, I just want to clarify. Those are the ones that fall in the 2023 deadline?
Actually, the entire process falls in the 2023 deadline. So,
yeah, but the heightened scrutiny, I mean, the earlier you resolve those, like July 1, you know, but everything else falls 2023.
yes, that is true. Also, the sooner that we're able to remediate those, the better it is for you to be in the compliance phase. And I say that with the fact that the March 17th, 2023 is the federal deadline for this. But with that being said, we have to back up our timeline a little bit, because if we have to make sure that everybody is compliant by that date.
Got
And so again, the sooner that items can be remediated in the remediation tab and gone through the heightened scrutiny process, the earlier that we can help get those providers and settings to compliance. And then that stress will be a lot less for providers and settings.
Yeah, I mean, not that I'm planning to wait till then. I'm just very concerned about, you know, trying to get my heightened scrutiny resolved as quickly, you know, before July 1st, you know, so that we don't have to go through the extra process of being reported to the CMS and all that. But I just wanted to clarify that, you know, I mean, my immediate goal right now is to get our facilities out of the heightened scrutiny. So
Sure, absolutely.
I just want to clarify that those are the ones that need to be done by July 1st. Getting us out of the heightened scrutiny is what needs to be done by July 1st.
So, yes, and then the rest of them is all done for sure in the remediation by question. You just put your cursor over the question, click it, and it'll open up the process for you to continue work with that. So that will continue with that. Also, just to kind of heightened scrutiny category 3, if you are in heightened scrutiny category 3 only, that is our main focus for the July 1st date. What Colin is really trying to do as well, and his team, is to make sure that if there are settings that are in heightened scrutiny category 1 or 2, just simply because the evidence wasn't able to be cleared to not be heightened scrutiny, we want to get those resolved as quickly as possible, and then that would make a lot of providers possibly heightened scrutiny 3 only. So again, we do recommend that everybody continue working both processes at the same time, both tabs. And we will do everything we can to get them reviewed and completed for everybody.
How about new settings that are coming up? Let's say maybe you're opening a setting next month or two in 2 months. How do those, I mean, just asking this.
Those settings, again, with that, our process for those is currently setting up with CMS for their review and guidance back to us. So once they provide us with that guidance and approval for that, we can initiate that process, and we will reach out to those new settings and notify them of what they need to do in order to obtain compliance. What we are really hoping for is for those agencies that have multiple settings and they're doing their policies and procedures at a provider level, that those same policies and procedures will be able to be utilized for the new setting, which would make the process streamlined and efficient. So that is our hope. And again, we're waiting for CMS to tell us what we can do next.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions, either in the chat? Looks like we haven't had anything come in, but we encourage that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I received a chat. So if you only have one site and it is a site, so, okay, sorry, let me just clarify it. It's involving the question about if you have multiple sites on the same block. So how or what proof did the settings submit to confirm that there is only one site? Stated that they submitted the page from the Kansas Community Connection website that lists the solitary site address, but it was rejected as insufficient evidence. So there's the settings looking for what would be sufficient evidence for that, proving that there's only one site.
Okay, thanks, Colin. And yeah, I can take that one since it falls on the remediation side. Is that at that point, some of the questions we're actually having to change our perspective, because even if you do have multiple sites on one street or block, there's nothing wrong with that. What we're actually looking for, and CMS has made it a little clearer to us since we've started this process, that they're actually looking to see something in policy and procedure that says persons served are not isolated solely due to their disabilities, and persons served have the same access to the greater community, services, and supports as those who do not have disabilities. So a lot of those incidences like that we're finding with question C3, C4, C5, and a few other questions that we've seen policies come across in relation to not being isolated solely due to their disabilities. They have the same access to the greater community services and supports as those who do not have disabilities is the best way that we have been or have found to show CMS compliance for those questions.
Thanks, Russell. It looks like we do have another question here from Nashai. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Dan, yes.
Okay, perfect. Just quick question. On C6, where it says, are persons served at this site required to receive medical, behavioral, or therapy services on site? Now, some of our clients, hold on, let me see. So we have like a mobile medical that comes here. Would that be yes? But they're not required to do it.
Right, and yes. And the best way to do that is that's at least giving them the option, even if you do offer those services at your location, it doesn't mean that they have to take those. So, and that's what CMS was really looking at for us. So in reference to that, simply showing a policy that as you as a provider, provider-wide, individuals have the opportunity to receive those services wherever they choose. Even if they choose to have them with you, that's their choice.
Okay. So then what if they don't have like behavioral or therapy services? It's still, I mean, some of them, if some do and some don't, we just want to make sure it's in the policy?
You want to look at it as a provider level, and that way, if you happen to get somebody later on that does have those services, then as a provider, you're already covered, saying, well, they can choose to get those services wherever they want.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. So we do have some questions here in the chat. When answering questions for each of the C's or other questions requiring the same answer, is it okay to highlight the answers? I am going to go ahead and say yes myself, as somebody who's reviewed a number of these. Please highlight them. And if you could mark the question that that answer pertains to, that would be fantastic. Russ or Colin, do you have any addition to that?
No, just make sure that if it's a policy or procedure, that it's has the identifying, is identifiable as a policy and procedure. And those guidelines are in the remediation resources tab.
The next, we are finding it difficult to meet the final rule with the current state template for person-centered support plans. Are there plans to update the template to better meet the final rule? Latanya answers, yes, there are plans.
Percy, with that to be clear though, the template was already scheduled for update. So the update is not going to be specific just because of the final rule. Just wanted to make that known.
Okay, thank you, Russell. I appreciate that. And thank you, Latanya, for being so quick in answering. Latanya further says, remember to always write policies and procedures from the agency level, not the individual level. Individual limitations are to be placed in person-centered documents. Thank you, Latanya. So one of the mantras that we try to use is that the agency policy should always be in the least restrictive format. So it should always be the policy of the provider to be as freeing and to exalt choice, autonomy, and so forth, and be in compliance with the final rule. If person served as their own choice or part of their person served plan are restricting themselves or are doing something that may be in conflict with the rule, that is not the policy of the provider. That is the individual autonomy of person served. So if person served in their own homes want to make sure they don't have locks on their bathrooms, that's fine. That shouldn't conflict with the policy of the provider to ensure privacy extends itself to these locks. So we are going to give some more time. We have about a half an hour. So I'd like to give some more time and energy toward answering questions, either in chat from people who are connecting via phone or from folks using the raise hand function. We will be here for another 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop talking and give people room to think. Thanks.
Percy, we've received a question in the chat. So
Perfect. If a person who chooses, this is from Destiny Support, if a person who chooses to live by themselves chooses not to have locks on their bedroom or bathroom doors, how do we comply with F3 and F4 if that is the case?
okay. So the final rule states that if there must be, let me get exactly what it states on here so I can put that, because that is a question that is asked quite often. Here we go. So, okay. So what the final rule states is each individual has privacy in their sleeping or living units. Units have entrance doors lockable by the individual with only appropriate staff having keys to the doors, and that's straight from the final rule. So with that, the entrance door to their sleeping or living unit, if they live in an apartment and they live by themselves, that would be the front door. And they would be able to have privacy, whether they have a door or a lock or either one on their bathroom. And then also with that, then, you know, they would be able to determine who should have a key and access to their place. So I hope that helped with that.
Thank you, Russell. Do we have any further questions in chat or any other media? I am looking up and down. I don't see anybody unmuting or any hands up. And it doesn't look like there's anything in the chat so far. Russell, are there any things that you have seen perhaps that need to be addressed? Or I know that we have some questions that have come that have been pretty hot in the other trainings that we can kind of go through. Are there any things that you want to pull out? And while I look for some of the questions that we've seen.
Actually, this group has asked some pretty good questions and covered a lot of them that we've gotten in before. So we've had some very good questions from you guys today. We do appreciate that, because good questions means that us being able to answer them for you now will allow it better to be, allow you better to write your policies or better to implement the practices. So
It looks like we have a question from Kara. If you, let's get to that and then we can go forward. Kara says, is public notice required for non-compliant settings? If yes, what will that look like?
That actually right now is, that is a question that would require somebody higher up our leadership to answer. I'm not sure if there will be a public notice for non-compliant settings, other than I do know when we get down to the process, if there is a setting that someone is residing in that has not met full compliance, that individual and guardian will be notified. So they can make the choice and be afforded options on what needs to happen.
Thank you, and Kara expresses her thanks as well. Appreciate that. Any other questions, concerns, comments? I'd like to formally express my appreciation for Colin's dog. He's just a fantastic little guy.
Thank you, and he thanks you as well.
Any further things? We have been, this is our third time doing this. It looks like Matlow has a question here. Let's go ahead.
Okay, thank you guys. You've been very helpful. I just want to ask one final question before we leave. I think it was Percy that said, just make sure what you're submitting identifies that policy and procedure. I just want to clarify that, like, on top of it, should it be labeled policy procedure, or, just making sure I'm not typing something up, because, like we have a standardized policy book, but, with each Q&A, we're gaining insights and, have to retype, rewrite the P&P. So I just want to clarify what you mean by, make sure it's labeled policy. Like on top of it, or like by the side, should it be labeled policy and procedure, page 5, or?
Well, one of the things that we found that normally, if you submit an entire policy for a question, if you highlight the area that question covers that you want to use as evidence, that will help us get to them quicker. The other part is when we originally look at policies and procedures, we did get a lot in the beginning that a lot of times policies and procedures usually at the, and I want to say usually, they don't have to be at the top. They can be on the page just about anywhere. A policy will say how many pages are in this particular version of the policy, usually on the cover page, and then it'll, on each page it says page blank of blank. So 7 of 14 pages or something like that. At the top of the policy, it will also, normally at the top, it'll say, client rights or individual rights. And again, these are examples. And then it'll have effective date on that somewhere on that page. And usually what we see a lot of is either in the very first line of the policy or at the top of the policy in like a header, it would have your provider name identifying that this policy belongs to you as a provider, and the title of this policy would be, as an example, residential rights or person served rights, individual rights, something along that line.
Yeah, but I'm not planning to submit the entire policy. I'm just going to submit like a page answering each question. So that's why I was just wanting to clarify that, that's okay. I mean, I don't know what would make it stand out as not just, because again, and let me just clarify. So you want the effective date from the policy, because most of these things we're already implementing them, if not all, except that we have to show the proof. So what date would be considered the right date? Like, could it be today, or does it have to be since the facility was established?
It would be the date the policy was established.
And is there so let's say like the corrections I'm learning from this lesson today, if I write it today, so the policy is effective today, would that in any way put a tag on me? Because I have been implementing these things, it's just that they weren't written in the forms that CMS wants them.
I would recommend probably at that point, instead of putting in an actual effective date, where you would have effective date or revised date and then an actual date, you could put in the word draft.
Okay.
That way, once we look at it and it meets compliance with that, then you can go ahead and make that, if you're the policy approving authority, then you would be able to make that date the effective date of it. We do run across quite a few of our providers that have a extensive policy approval process. So they have to write a policy, then it goes up to their provider board, which may only meet once a quarter for approval. So we don't want to hold anybody up. So if they just use the word draft as their revision date, and until it gets right, then once that is in compliance with final rule, then they can go ahead and take it up to the policy approval authority for a date, and we're good with that.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Mello. We still looking for questions. We got about 20 minutes left. Don't see any in chat. Still just kind of making sure that we give space for this. This is our third of three. Again, I will note that these will be posted on the Community Connections website for folks who were either unable to attend or would like to refresh themselves on what was discussed today. There have been 3 of these sessions, and there is a possibility that more things will be coming in the future to ensure that folks are getting the proper understanding of remediation, heightened scrutiny, and any questions that they have to be answered. I want to also remind folks that there are resources. Russell and I have talked about them in his words in the beginning of this. There's a resource page on the Community Connections website full of fantastic things and helping hands. There's also the live chat, which is open for providers from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. So if you are needing some help in that regard, that is also an option for you. There are emails. I know Russell had put his email out there recently. And so if you are on the phone and you were not able to get that down, I'm sure that Russell can say it again or give it again if he so desires. But there are ways to get in contact with us if you do have questions that come up after this session. Any other questions, concerns, comments at this time? Thanks. And Russell has put his email in the chat. Again, for folks on the phone, it is Russell, RUSSELL, Bowles, B as in boy, OWLES, @ks.gov.
Percy, don't forget the dot in between my first and last name.
Correct. Yes, to separate Russell and Bowles. So Russell, it'll be Russell dot Bowles, RUSSELL dot B as in boy, OWLES at KS.gov. Thank you, Russell. Folks, we'll give another 3 minutes or so if we have no pressing business. At 2:45, we will go ahead and donate 15 minutes back to the time coffers for everybody. But I want to make sure that we give plenty of time for folks to think of things, to review their documents, to make sure that they've gotten what they've needed today. Oh, also, and Zane, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we'll be having a survey after this is done with. Is that correct?
That's correct. It'll be sent out through email.
Fantastic. So after this is over, you all will be receiving, those of you who have attended will be receiving an email just getting the efficacy of this process so that we know just how effective we were. Feel free to be as brutally honest as possible. This data always kind of factors into how we structure our trainings in the future. So please do that. Hey all, we are closing in on 2:45. We're going to go ahead and close the meeting unless, again, we have some last minute questions. It doesn't seem like we have. We've been checking chat and making sure that folks have not been unmuting or announcing themselves. Thank everybody for their time and energy today. Feel free to answer the email around our survey to make sure that we know whether this was good and effective for you, and have a fantastic afternoon.